I turned 18 just as life was supposed to get easier, or so I thought. Graduating high school, working part-time at a local diner, and saving up for college were supposed to be the highlights of my year. But instead, my half-sister Sarah, then 15, turned my world into a battlefield. Sarah and I were never close. Growing up, we shared a father but lived in different households. She stayed with our dad and her mom Carla in their suburban home, while I lived with my mom in a smaller apartment across town. The tension between us simmered for years, but it finally boiled over that summer. One night at dinner, I stopped by Dad's house to drop off some documents he needed. I was in a good mood and even brought donuts for Sarah. When I handed them to her, she sneered and muttered something about fake nice. I didn't react, but I should have seen the storm brewing. 2 weeks later, Dad called me. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice unusually cold. I could hear Carla in the background muttering something. When I arrived at their house, Sarah was sitting on the couch, arms crossed, looking smug. "Emily," Dad started, "Sarah told us something deeply concerning." "What's going on?" I asked, confused. Sarah rolled her eyes. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. Prostitution? Drugs? Seriously, Emily?" The words hit me like a freight train. I froze. "What? Are you kidding me?" She wasn't. Sarah claimed she had proof that I was working as an escort and using hard drugs. She even showed Dad and Carla text messages, completely fabricated, of course. I didn't even recognize the phone number she was showing them, but the messages were explicit enough to leave an impression. I tried to defend myself, but Dad looked at me with disappointment I couldn't shake. Carla was outright hostile, telling me I was no longer welcome in their house. "You're poisoning Sarah with your lifestyle," Carla spat. Sarah's crocodile tears sealed the deal. "I just want to feel safe, Dad." I was furious, but I left. What else could I do? The next few weeks were a nightmare. Every time I tried to explain myself, Dad brushed me off, convinced Sarah was telling the truth. I stopped by to confront her, only for her to call the police and claim I was threatening her. Things escalated when Sarah began spreading her lies around town. She told mutual acquaintances and even some of my old teachers that I was a drug-addicted escort. The rumors got back to my boss at the diner, who pulled me aside one shift. "Emily, I've been hearing some troubling things," she said cautiously. "Are you okay?" I broke down crying. The lies were ruining my reputation, my relationships, and now, even my livelihood. Desperate, I decided to fight back. I spent hours combing through social media, looking for any clue about how Sarah fabricated those texts. With the help of my best friend, Chloe, a tech-savvy genius, I found the number Sarah used to create the fake messages. It was linked to a disposable phone purchased at a gas station near her school. Chloe helped me track down security footage from the gas station. The footage showed Sarah buying the phone. Armed with proof, I confronted my dad. "Sarah lied, and here's the evidence," I said, slapping down the video stills and phone records. Dad looked stunned, but Carla jumped in. "This doesn't prove anything. Emily, you're just trying to shift blame." Before I could respond, Sarah walked into the room. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake innocence. I laid everything out in front of her. For a moment, she was speechless. Then she burst into tears, screaming that I was ruining her life. Dad finally started to see through her act, but the damage was done. I couldn't forgive him or Carla for believing Sarah over me. Even after exposing Sarah's lies, the scars remained. I lost friends, struggled to rebuild my reputation, and couldn't trust my dad anymore. Sarah? She got grounded and lost her phone privileges for a month. It wasn't enough, but I learned to move on. I poured myself into college applications, got a new job, and started therapy. To this day, I wonder why Sarah did it. Was she jealous? Did she just hate me that much? I may never know. When I think about how everything fell apart, it's hard to pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe it was when my half-sister Sarah decided to spread those sick rumors about me. Or maybe it was when my dad, John, and his wife Karen decided to believe her over me without a second thought. Either way, it feels like my life as I knew it ended the day they turned their backs on me. I had been living with John and Karen for almost a year at that point. My mom had to move across the country for work, and since I was finishing up high school, it made sense for me to stay behind. I thought it would be a chance to bond with my dad. I was wrong. Sarah was the first hurdle. She always treated me like I didn't belong in her family. At first, it was subtle digs, comments about how my clothes looked cheap or how I wasn't as smart as her friends. I ignored it. But then she started outright lying about me to Karen and John, saying I would sneak out at night or that I was disrespectful when they weren't around. One night, Karen pulled me aside after dinner. "Emily, Sarah told us she found drugs in your room." I blinked at her stunned. "What? That's not true." "Don't even." "She wouldn't lie about something like this," Karen interrupted, her voice cold. "She's a good girl." I was furious. "You didn't even ask me if it's true. Why would you just believe her?" Karen crossed her arms. "Because she's never given us a reason not to." From then on, everything I did was under a microscope. If I stayed out late studying with friends, I was irresponsible. If I accidentally left a dish in the sink, I was lazy. Meanwhile, Sarah could do no wrong. Then came the night that changed everything. I was sitting in my room, scrolling through my phone, when John burst in without knocking. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, holding up a photo on his phone. I squinted at it, confused. It was a blurry picture of a girl who vaguely resembled me, sitting in the passenger seat of a car with what looked like a bag of pills in her lap. "That's not me," I said, standing up. "Sarah got this from one of her friends." "Don't lie to me, Emily." "I'm not lying," I shouted. "This is insane." But it didn't matter. John was convinced. From that moment, the atmosphere in the house became unbearable. Karen barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was with thinly veiled contempt. John started locking the doors at night, as if he thought I'd sneak out to sell drugs. Sarah, of course, played the victim perfectly. She'd act scared whenever I walked into the room, whispering to Karen about how she didn't feel safe with me around. One day, I came home from school to find my things packed in boxes by the front door. John was waiting for me, his arms crossed. "You need to leave," he said bluntly. "What?" My heart sank. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," he replied. "You've brought nothing but chaos into this house." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Dad, please." "You're not my responsibility anymore," he said, cutting me off. Karen was standing behind him, her face unreadable. Sarah peeked out from the hallway, a smug smile playing on her lips. With nowhere else to go, I grabbed my things and left. I ended up crashing on a friend's couch for a while, but it was only a temporary solution. I didn't have enough money to get my own place, and I was too embarrassed to tell my mom what had happened. Meanwhile, Sarah's lies continued to haunt me. She told people I was homeless because I had stolen money from John and Karen. She even went so far as to fake text messages where I supposedly admitted to stealing from them. Things got even worse when I found out Sarah was spreading rumors at school. I overheard two girls in the bathroom talking about how I was a drug dealer and probably a prostitute. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront Sarah directly. I waited outside her school one afternoon and caught her as she was walking to her car. "We need to talk," I said firmly. She looked at me like I was a piece of gum stuck to her shoe. "What do you want?" "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. "What did I ever do to you?" She laughed. "You exist. That's enough." Her words stung, but I refused to back down. "You need to stop lying about me, Sarah. This isn't a game." "Or what?" she sneered. "You're pathetic, Emily. Nobody believes you, and nobody ever will." I wanted to hit her, but I knew that would only make things worse. Instead, I walked away, feeling more defeated than ever. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, Sarah upped the ante. She created a fake Instagram account pretending to be me and posted incriminating photos she doctored to make it look like I was doing drugs and partying with strangers. The account quickly gained followers, and soon enough, I was getting messages from people asking if the rumors were true. I finally broke down and called my mom, telling her everything. She was furious and booked a flight to come see me the next day. When she arrived, she marched straight to John and Karen's house and demanded to speak with them. I stayed outside, too scared to face them again. After what felt like hours, my mom came back out, her face red with anger. "They're hopeless," she said. "But don't worry, sweetie. We're going to fix this." My mom hired a lawyer and started gathering evidence to clear my name. With her help, we were able to prove that the Instagram account was fake and traced it back to Sarah's IP address. We also found witnesses who were willing to testify that Sarah had bragged about ruining my life. The truth eventually came out, but the damage was already done. My relationship with John was shattered, and I had to transfer schools to escape the rumors. Even now, I'm still picking up the pieces. But at least I know the truth, and that's something no one can take away from me. When John threw me out of the house, I felt utterly lost. My belongings were crammed into 2 garbage bags, and I had no idea where I was going. The cold night air seemed to mock me as I stood on the curb, trying to figure out my next move. The thought of calling my mom crossed my mind, but I couldn't do it, not yet. I didn't want her to know just how bad things had gotten. I called Chloe, my best friend, and explained the situation through tears. Without hesitation, she told me to come over. Chloe lived with her boyfriend Matt, in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment. It wasn't ideal, but they made space for me on their couch. The first few nights were a blur of exhaustion and humiliation. I felt like a burden, even though Chloe assured me I wasn't. Matt was less enthusiastic about my presence, but he tried to hide it for Chloe's sake. A week later, Chloe sat me down. "Emily, you can't stay here forever. Have you thought about getting your own place?" "I've thought about it," I admitted. "But I don't have enough money. I used most of my savings for school stuff." Chloe nodded thoughtfully. "What about a second job? You could save up quicker." I took her advice and started working at a coffee shop during the day while keeping my evening shifts at the diner. It was exhausting, but it paid off. Within a month, I found a tiny studio apartment in a rundown part of town. It wasn't much, cracked tiles in the kitchen, a drafty window that wouldn't shut properly. But it was mine. I scraped together what little furniture I could. Chloe gave me an old futon, and Matt grudgingly donated a folding table. The rest I found at thrift stores or on the curb. I didn't care about the mismatched pieces or the peeling paint on the walls. For the first time in weeks, I had a space where I could breathe. One evening, I was balancing a tray of drinks at the diner when a new customer walked in. He was tall, with dark hair and an easy smile that lit up the room. He took a seat at the counter and ordered a black coffee. "Busy night?" he asked as I poured his drink. "You have no idea," I replied, giving him a tired smile. "I'm Brian," he said, extending a hand. "Emily," I replied, shaking it briefly before hurrying off to take another order. Over the next few weeks, Brian became a regular. He'd come in after work, always sitting at the counter and striking up a conversation. At first, I thought he was just being polite, but soon I realized he genuinely cared about what I had to say. One night, as I was clearing plates from his table, he asked, "Do you ever get time off? Maybe we could grab a coffee sometime when you're not working." I hesitated. After everything I'd been through, the idea of letting someone new into my life was terrifying. But there was something about Brian that felt different, safe. "Sure," I said finally. Our first coffee date turned into hours of conversation. Brian worked as a mechanic and had a knack for fixing things. He told me about growing up in a small town and how he moved to the city to start fresh. I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't with anyone else. Over time, Brian became my rock. When I had bad days, like the time my landlord threatened to evict me for being late on rent, he was there to reassure me. When I doubted myself, he reminded me of my strength. But life wasn't done throwing curveballs. One night, I came home from a late shift to find my apartment door ajar. My heart sank. I pushed the door open cautiously and saw the mess. Drawers pulled out, my few belongings scattered across the floor. I called the police, but they weren't much help. "Probably just kids looking for quick cash," the officer said as he filled out the report. The break-in left me shaken. Brian offered to let me stay at his place for a while, but I couldn't bring myself to impose. Instead, he helped me install new locks and even rigged a makeshift alarm using fishing wire and bells. A few weeks later, Sarah resurfaced in the worst way possible. She had found my address, probably through mutual acquaintances, and decided to pay me a visit. I opened the door to find her standing there, arms crossed and a smirk on her face. "Nice place," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "What do you want, Sarah?" I asked, barely able to keep my anger in check. "I just thought you'd like to know that Dad's thinking of pressing charges. He says you stole money from him when you left." "That's a lie and you know it," I snapped. "Doesn't matter," she replied, her smile widening. "It's his word against yours." I slammed the door in her face, but her words stayed with me. The idea of being dragged into court over something I didn't do was horrifying. Brian found me crying later that night and insisted on helping. "We'll fight this," he said firmly. With his support, I started gathering evidence to clear my name. I found old bank statements proving that the money in my account came from my jobs, not my dad. Chloe even agreed to testify about Sarah's history of lying and manipulation. The threat of legal action never materialized, probably because Sarah and John knew they didn't have a case, but the ordeal left me more determined than ever to move on. Brian and I grew closer through it all. He didn't just support me, he believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. As I sat in my tiny apartment one evening, surrounded by the chaos of my life, I realized something important. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was rebuilding, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Life after Sarah's lies felt like a never-ending battle. I had managed to carve out a fragile semblance of stability with Brian's support, but the scars from what my family put me through were still fresh. Then, one evening, a knock on my door set a chain of events in motion that I never saw coming. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I approached the door cautiously. When I opened it, a tall, lanky guy with messy blonde hair and a nervous expression was standing there. "Can I help you?" I asked, wary. "Are you Emily?" he asked. "Who's asking?" "I'm Connor," he said. I used to date Sarah." Hearing her name sent a jolt through me. "What do you want?" "I need to talk to you," he said, glancing over his shoulder like he was afraid of being followed. "It's important." I debated shutting the door in his face, but something in his demeanor stopped me. "Fine," I said, stepping aside. "But make it quick." Connor walked in and perched awkwardly on the edge of my couch. He looked around my small apartment like he was trying to gather his thoughts. "I broke up with Sarah a few weeks ago," he started. "She wasn't who I thought she was." I crossed my arms, waiting for him to get to the point. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "She told me something. About you. And I thought you deserved to know." "What did she say?" I asked, my heart pounding. "She admitted she lied," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "About everything. The drugs, the prostitution, the texts. All of it." I stared at him stunned. "Why?" "She said she was jealous," Connor explained. "Of the attention you were getting. From your dad, from other people. She thought you were overshadowing her." I sat down, trying to process what he was saying. After everything she had put me through, it all came down to petty jealousy? Connor looked at me apologetically. "I know it doesn't change what she did, but I thought you should hear it." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "I couldn't keep it to myself anymore," he said. "It's been eating at me. You didn't deserve what she did to you." I believed him. There was a sincerity in his voice that Sarah had never possessed. "Thank you for telling me," I said, though the words felt hollow. What was I supposed to do with this information? After Connor left, I sat in silence for a long time. Part of me wanted to confront Sarah, to force her to admit the truth to everyone. But another part of me, an exhausted, wounded part, just wanted to let it go. In the end, I decided not to share what I'd learned with my parents. They had made their choice when they believed Sarah over me. Even if they found out the truth now, it wouldn't erase the pain they caused or the damage they allowed Sarah to inflict. Instead, I focused on moving forward. But life had a way of testing my resolve. One afternoon, while I was at work, Brian called me. His voice was tense. Emily, you need to come home. Now. What's going on? I asked, alarmed. I don't want to scare you, but someone broke into your apartment again. My stomach dropped. I'll be right there. When I arrived, the sight of my ransacked apartment brought tears to my eyes. Drawers had been pulled out, and my few possessions were scattered everywhere. The door frame was splintered where it had been forced open. Brian was waiting for me outside, his arms crossed protectively. Are you okay? He asked gently. No, I admitted, choking back a sob. We called the police, but just like last time, they weren't much help. Looks like a random break-in, the officer said. Probably kids or someone looking for valuables. But it didn't feel random to me. A week later, I found out why. I was scrolling through social media when I stumbled upon a post that made my blood run cold. It was a photo of my apartment, taken from the outside, through my window. The caption read, "Still playing the victim, I see." The account was anonymous, but I knew it was Sarah. Brian helped me report the account, but it was deleted before anything could be done. That's it, Brian said. You're staying with me. I resisted at first, not wanting to impose, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. You're not safe here, Emily. This isn't up for debate. Moving in with Brian was a turning point. For the first time in a long time, I felt secure. He went out of his way to make me feel at home, even setting up a little desk for me to study at. But the shadows of my past lingered. One night, as we were watching a movie, there was a knock at the door. Brian got up to answer it, and I heard raised voices. When I peeked around the corner, I saw Connor standing there, looking panicked. I need to talk to Emily, he said. What's going on? I asked, stepping forward. Connor looked at me, his face pale. Sarah found out I talked to you. She's threatening to ruin my life. What do you mean? She's been spreading rumors about me, saying I'm abusive, Connor said, his voice shaking. My job's on the line. I don't know what to do. I felt a pang of guilt. Connor had done the right thing by coming to me, and now he was paying the price. We'll figure something out, I said, though I wasn't sure how. Together, Brian and I helped Connor gather evidence to clear his name. We tracked down text messages and social media posts that contradicted Sarah's claims. It was a long, stressful process, but in the end, Connor was able to keep his job. The ordeal brought us closer. Connor became a friend, someone who understood the depths of Sarah's manipulation. Through it all, I held on to one truth. I was stronger than Sarah's lies. She could try to tear me down, but I wouldn't let her win. The day Brian proposed was one of the happiest of my life. It happened on a crisp autumn evening, under a canopy of golden leaves in the park where we had our first date. He got down on one knee, holding a simple but beautiful ring, and asked, Emily, will you marry me? I barely let him finish before saying yes. For the first time in years, I felt like my life was finally moving in the right direction. But even as we celebrated that night with friends, a dark cloud lingered in the back of my mind. I knew my family would find a way to ruin this for me. Planning the wedding was exciting but overwhelming. Brian's family was incredibly supportive, and his mother, Linda, immediately offered to help with everything from choosing the venue to picking out flowers. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness that my own family wouldn't be involved. I made the decision early on not to invite Sarah. There was no question in my mind. After everything she had done, she didn't deserve a place at my wedding. I didn't expect her to care, but I underestimated how much chaos she could still cause. The trouble started when I told John and Karen about the wedding. I was hesitant to reach out, but I thought they at least deserved to know. When I called, Karen answered, her tone as icy as ever. Hi, Karen, I began nervously. I wanted to let you and Dad know that I'm getting married. There was a long pause. Oh, she said finally. That's nice. I'd like Dad to walk me down the aisle, I continued, ignoring her lack of enthusiasm. Karen's voice sharpened. What about Sarah? What about her? Are you inviting her? I hesitated. No, I'm not. Well, then I don't see how your father can support this wedding, Karen said bluntly. What does Sarah have to do with this? I snapped, my frustration boiling over. This is my day, not hers. Karen didn't answer, but I could hear John in the background. What's going on, he asked. She's excluding Sarah, Karen said, as if I had committed some unforgivable sin. John took the phone. Emily, this isn't right, he said. Sarah is your sister. She deserves to be there. She's not my sister, I shot back. She gave up that right the day she ruined my life. John's voice hardened. If Sarah isn't invited, I won't come either. I hung up without another word. Over the next few weeks, John and Karen doubled down on their ultimatum. Karen called me repeatedly, accusing me of being selfish and childish. John sent long emails about family unity and how I was tearing the family apart. I tried to stay calm, but their words hurt more than I cared to admit. At one point, I broke down crying in front of Brian. Why can't they just support me for once? I sobbed. Brian held me tightly. You don't need their approval, Emily, he said gently. This is your day. Don't let them take that away from you. His words gave me strength. I realized he was right. My parents' support wasn't important. What mattered was starting a new chapter of my life with someone who truly loved me. As the wedding day approached, I made my stance clear. Sarah wasn't invited, and if John and Karen chose not to come, that was their decision. In the midst of all this drama, I found an unexpected ally, Brian's sister, Rachel. She was a fiercely independent woman who had dealt with her own share of family drama and understood exactly what I was going through. Family can be the worst sometimes, Rachel said one night as we stuffed envelopes with invitations. But you've got a new family now. We're here for you. Her words brought tears to my eyes. For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged. The final blow came a week before the wedding. John sent me a letter. Yes, a physical letter, reiterating his ultimatum. He claimed that by excluding Sarah, I was disrespecting the family and making it impossible for him to attend. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I focused on the people who truly mattered: Brian, his family, and my friends who had supported me through everything. The wedding day was perfect. We chose a beautiful outdoor venue surrounded by lush greenery and flowers. As I walked down the aisle, arm in arm with Linda, who had graciously offered to stand in for my father, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. When I looked into Brian's eyes at the altar, all the pain and drama of the past melted away. In that moment, nothing else mattered. After the ceremony, Rachel pulled me aside and handed me a glass of champagne. "You did it," she said with a grin. "Yeah," I replied, smiling through happy tears. I did. Not having my parents there was bittersweet, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I felt like I was living life on my terms. As Brian and I danced under the stars that night, I realized I didn't need their approval. I had built a life filled with love, resilience, and true family. The kind you choose, not the kind you're born into. And that was enough for me. After the wedding, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known was possible. For years, my life had been consumed by my family's toxic influence, but now I had chosen a different path, one that didn't include them. Brian and I returned from our honeymoon full of excitement about the future. We spent 10 days in a cozy cabin by the mountains, hiking, cooking together, and talking about our dreams. It was the perfect escape, a reminder of why I married him in the first place. When we got back, the reality of cutting ties with my family began to sink in. I blocked John, Karen, and Sarah on every platform, deleted their numbers, and even changed my own to prevent them from contacting me. It was drastic, but I knew it was necessary. Brian was my rock during this transition. He understood how hard it was for me, even though I tried to hide it. One evening, as we sat on the couch eating takeout, he said, "You don't have to pretend you're okay all the time, you know. It's okay to grieve what you've lost." His words hit me hard. I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge the pain of losing my family, even if the separation was my choice. That night, I cried in his arms for hours, releasing years of pent-up frustration and sadness. In the months that followed, I threw myself into building a life that revolved around love, stability, and personal growth. Brian and I adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy little terrier mix named Max, who quickly became the heart of our home. I also started a new job as a graphic designer at a small marketing firm, where I finally felt like my creativity was being appreciated. But just when I thought my past was behind me, John and Karen tried to force their way back into my life. It started with a letter. One crisp morning, I found an envelope addressed to me in handwriting I recognized immediately: John's. My stomach churned as I debated whether to open it. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. The letter was full of apologies, or at least, what John thought passed for apologies. He wrote about how he regretted how things turned out and how he missed having me in the family. But what stood out most was his justification for his behavior. He claimed that everything he and Karen had done was out of love and concern for me. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. How could they call what they did love? I showed the letter to Brian, who read it with a grim expression. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Nothing," I said firmly. "I'm not letting them back into my life." But John and Karen didn't take no for an answer. Over the next few weeks, more letters arrived, each one more desperate than the last. Karen wrote one claiming she was worried about my mental health and begging me to see a family therapist with them. It was infuriating how they twisted the narrative to make themselves look like victims. When the letters failed, they showed up at our house unannounced. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Brian and I were working in the garden when we heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked up to see John and Karen stepping out of their sedan. My heart sank. "What are they doing here?" I whispered. Brian put down his shovel and walked toward them. "You need to leave," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We just want to talk to Emily," John said, holding up his hands as if he were some kind of peacekeeper. "She doesn't want to talk to you," Brian replied. Ignoring him, Karen called out to me. "Emily, please. Just hear us out." I stayed where I was, refusing to engage. Brian stood his ground, eventually forcing them to leave. But the encounter left me shaken. Over time, their attempts to reconnect became more invasive. They sent flowers to my workplace, called Brian's parents to ask about me, and even tried to contact Chloe, hoping she could mediate. The final straw came when they showed up at one of my work events. I was attending a local business expo to showcase some of my design work when I spotted them across the room. Karen was waving at me like nothing had happened, while John stood awkwardly behind her. I turned to my coworker Lily, who noticed my pale face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "My parents are here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you want me to get security?" I hesitated for a moment but then nodded. "Yes, please." Watching them get escorted out was both satisfying and heartbreaking. I couldn't believe they had stooped so low, but it also cemented my resolve. I wasn't going to let them derail my life again. After that, I decided to take legal action. With Brian's help, I filed for a restraining order against them. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary to protect my peace of mind. The judge granted the order, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief. John and Karen finally stopped trying to contact me, and I was able to focus on the life I was building with Brian. As the years went by, I found happiness in the little things. Weekend hikes with Brian and Max, quiet evenings spent painting, and the support of the chosen family I had created. I'll always carry the scars of my past, but I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means moving forward, stronger and wiser than before. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I had been living my life peacefully, fully focused on my relationship with Brian and the little family we had created with our scrappy terrier Max. For once, my world didn't revolve around the toxic drama of my past. That peace, however, was shattered one evening when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Emily, a strained, tearful voice said. It took me a moment to recognize Karen. I hadn't heard her voice in so long that it felt almost foreign. My chest tightened, but I kept my tone cold. What do you want? It's Sarah, she said, her voice breaking. She's in a bad place. I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to hang up then and there, but morbid curiosity kept me on the line. What happened? Karen let out a shaky breath. She overdosed. Her voice cracked. It was a suicide attempt. For a moment, I was silent. The words felt heavy, sinking into me like stones. As much as I resented Sarah, hearing that she had reached such a dark place was unsettling. But my resolve didn't waver. I'm sorry to hear that, I said finally. But I don't know what you expect me to do about it. She's in rehab now, Karen continued, ignoring my response. It's a really good place, expensive, but they specialize in cases like hers. The doctors say family support is crucial to her recovery. I felt a sharp pang of anger. Family support? I repeated. You mean the same family she destroyed with her lies? The same family that threw me under the bus for her? Emily, please, Karen pleaded. She's your sister. No, I said firmly. She's not. Before she could argue, I hung up. The call left me shaken. I didn't know how to feel. Anger, pity, sadness. They all swirled inside me like a storm. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let myself be dragged back into their chaos. A week later, another call came, this time from John. I ignored it, but he left a voicemail. His tone was softer than Karen's, almost pleading. Emily, I know you're upset with us, but Sarah needs you. She's been asking about you. Please think about it. I deleted the message without responding. Over the next few weeks, their attempts to involve me became relentless. Karen sent emails, John tried calling Brian, and even Sarah managed to send me a handwritten letter from the rehabilitation center. The letter was the hardest to ignore. Her handwriting was shaky, the words uneven, but the guilt dripping from each line was palpable. Emily, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to tell you how sorry I am. I ruined everything. I lied, I hurt you, and now I'm paying the price. Please, if there's any chance you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I'd like to talk. Sarah. I stared at the letter for a long time, my emotions warring within me. A small part of me wanted to believe she was sincere, that she had truly changed, but the bigger, wiser part of me knew better. This wasn't about me. It was about their need to drag me back into their dysfunction. Brian found me sitting at the kitchen table, the letter still clutched in my hands. What's that? He asked. I handed it to him, and he read it silently. When he was done, he set it down and looked at me with concern. What are you going to do? Nothing, I said, my voice resolute. I've given them enough of my life. Brian nodded, his support unwavering. I'm proud of you. Despite my decision, the pressure didn't let up. Karen called my workplace, pretending it was an emergency to get through to me. My boss, Lily, was livid when she found out it was a personal matter. Emily, you don't have to deal with this, she said, her voice firm. If they contact you here again, let me know. We'll handle it. Even Chloe got dragged into it. One evening, she called me, her voice tense. Karen reached out to me. She said Sarah is asking for you. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her to leave you the hell alone, Chloe replied. But, Emily, are you sure you don't want to at least hear Sarah out? No, I said, my voice sharp. I've made my decision. As the weeks turned into months, the attempts to involve me gradually faded. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that Sarah completed her rehabilitation program and moved into a halfway house. Part of me hoped she was genuinely getting better, but I didn't let myself dwell on it. I had my own life to focus on. Brian and I decided to take a long overdue vacation, heading to a small coastal town for some much-needed relaxation. Walking along the beach with Max, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. One evening, as we watched the sunset from our balcony, Brian turned to me and said, "You've come so far, Emily. I hope you know how strong you are." His words brought tears to my eyes. For the first time, I truly believed him. Cutting ties with my family hadn't been easy, but it was the best decision I ever made. I finally had the space to heal, to grow, and to build a life filled with love and happiness. No more toxic relationships. No more looking back. And that was enough.